You're already a successful farmer, but what if you could dig a little deeper? To take in a wealth of knowledge on topics like farm profitability, grain marketing, leadership skills, and more. Build your knowledge, strengthen your foundation, and move from experienced to expert. Welcome to GrowU.
For me, I grew up in a small town. It's called Lucas, Ohio. Either you worked on a farm or you lived next to a farm. So for me, this has been a passion of mine, to say the least, to make sure that the families and communities that I served and served with are well supported in this endeavor, because that's home. That's who I lived with. That's who I grew up with. My name's Ryan Patton, and I'm with Nationwide's Advanced Consulting Group. And specifically, I'm here to talk to you today about some planning, and probably the toughest planning that you're ever going to do, and that is around succession planning. The thing that I love about farming isn't just the people, it's the passion around everything that you do, and that's what also makes this such a hard, challenging topic to cover. So with that, let's dive in. Statistics show us that there's right around 2 million family farm operations today. That's actually gone down a little bit. As you can imagine, certain families haven't planned for this properly, and now they are being gobbled up by the larger farm operators out there. So it's definitely an issue that we're seeing come up pretty frequently. The other issue that we see that makes this so relevant is the age of our owner-operator. Owner-operators, if we go back to 2017, right around 57 years old. Today, that is much closer to 60. And from my perspective, that means over the next decade, 2 decades, the largest group of transition planning that we are going to encounter is right before us. And a lot of those transitions aren't necessarily planned for. And our stats, just to finish that out, indicate that as well. Only 3 out of 10 individuals that we've surveyed recently have an actual transition plan in place. And that's pretty shocking. So what do we do? How do we actually address this issue? That goes to probably the 5 elements that we've seen be very successful. If you address these 5 elements, you're going to be in a position that a lot of your peers aren't in today. The 5 elements that we'll cover today are: 1, succession planning; 2, business planning; 3, risk mitigation; 4, financial independence and mentorship planning; 5, estate planning. Now, the first one is really around people. It's called succession planning. And this is all about people. People first, people foremost, people always. Those are the individuals that if I am not there tomorrow as the owner-operator, they're going to wake up the next day to do the things that we've set out to do, to make the operation successful for their children, for their next generation. There's a reason why it came from your parents to you, and we want to make sure that that same transition happens to the next generation, to keep that legacy in place. People are challenging. That's why it's such a hard conversation. The reason for that is it's a family. Families come with certain dynamics, a lot of quirks to some degree too, but it's really around people. And they come with certain passions, they come with certain drives behind it, and that makes this conversation so hard. One of the ways we found to be very successful in alleviating some of those contentious areas is to have another individual join your conversation, and that's the farm's voice. If you were sitting at the dinner table having Thanksgiving dinner and you had an open spot for the farm at your table and you wanted to approach this conversation, what would the farm tell you is the best person to own the operations going forward? Is it everybody? Is it just a certain individual, son or daughter? How does that look? What would the farm say to you as the family needs to happen? Same with the land. If I'm the farm's voice Should I be broken up to everybody? Should I stay concentrated to just the folks that are maybe the owner-operators of the farm going forward? How does that work? How do I make it fair for my family? So these conversations are critical. Knowing people and who the roles are, what they're going to do, how they're going to implement the next step is key to continuing on the next elements. The second element that we now get to go to is really around business planning. And business planning for me comes in a couple of different ways. First, now that we've identified the proper individuals for our operation, we want to make sure that the farm is able to actually support them from an income perspective. So we want to make sure that if everyone in the operation has identified that they are going to take over, that we can actually support them financially. The second part that I would say, which is equally as important, is are we in the proper setup from our operational perspective? Do we have the right entity structure to make sense? Are we going to be paying these individuals through W-2? Are we a partnership? Are we paying them out differently? The other part of this too is to some degree risk mitigation. We know that there is a lot of risk when operating an operation, and having a business structure tends to alleviate some of that risk. We want to make sure that whatever we do is consistent for everything that we're going to be looking at. That's really what business planning is around. And that transitions well into our third step, and that's risk management. Risk management for us is something that you have to deal with every day. As a farmer, you know that there is risk at every turn. Not just I'm going to be out in the field with a piece of equipment that has a lot of risk inherent with that operation. I also have risk if I have an employee that's going to be driving down the road delivering my grain to an elevator. That's what gets so interesting with this risk planning, risk management portion, and why it's so important to identify the top two first. Now that we know the people that are going to be involved with the operations, we can identify risk with each of those people that are going to be active with your farm. That is key. That helps us alleviate a lot of unnecessary liability that could be there, or plan for the risk that are going to be present because they are there. So we want to make sure we have that side. The other things to consider in this section are risk to your commodities. You are in a business that's dependent on the well-being of somewhat the globe, and that is challenging. I know you are well aware of those risks, but I would say the most successful operations that I see day in and day out identify that as a risk and work to alleviate some of that burden. The other side that I would say, our last factor probably in this group, is really around long-term care. I've seen operations have to fork over nearly $70,000 to a long-term care facility that wasn't planned. And if you're dealing with that level of income cash need for your operation, what do you sacrifice? Do you sacrifice expanding? Do you sacrifice that new purchase to make yourself more efficient? Again, knowing that risk and protecting against that risk helps you be a better operation. And that leads into our fourth discussion. And this one is key for a lot of individuals just because it gives you the power to say, next generation, I'm ready for you to take over. I'm ready for you to have some responsibility. And here is why. And this is around financial independence and mentorship planning. And that is why it's the fourth one as well. We know the right people are in place. We know the business entity structure for our farm. We know the farm income that we need. We've protected against the risk that are out there. Now, I know those factors. I know what the business needs to produce itself. I'm in the position now to say, I'm comfortable with you, next generation owner, son or daughter. I'm comfortable with you making decisions that affect up to $1,000. So if there's a piece of equipment that broke down, I'm going to let you take full responsibility, have at it. You can make decisions on up to $1,000, up to $2,000, up to $10,000, whatever's relevant for your operation, allowing you to know where you're at financially, have the ability to be somewhat independent from the operation, gives that next generation ownership. Where most operations, I would say, if we go back to our stats show that farm owners are right around 60 years old. And that's traditionally where you actually have ownership of the asset. So if I'm in my late 40s, do I actually have the ability to make a decision for the operations or not? does it actually feel like mine? Am I willing to stay with the operation knowing that I don't even have a say on small incidentals? Having this step planned for is key to making sure those folks stay engaged with you and not seek a different opportunity. The other step to that is knowing, how do I actually plan for that bucket? How do I make sure I'm financially independent and don't rely on necessarily renting to that next operator? I want to have the ability to have the secondary income source, whether that's a retirement plan, whether that's some other sort of investments that you have. I want to have some kind of assets there to provide for me in the event that I want to give up more of the decision-making process. So knowing those assets, knowing how to put them to use for you is key to this step. And now that we've dealt with those four, we're on to our fifth and final. And the reason it's fifth and final is because this is when you have the conversation with your attorney, you have it with your CPA. This is when you memorialize all of those goals and objectives that you've identified through this process. You're at the point where you're drafting up your wills because now you know the people and the positions they need to be in to make your farm successful. You don't want to go to them first, have a fee charge to put in a will, to maybe address what you think is the correct way. You got to have that farm voice in place first. So that's why it's fifth and last. We want to make sure that you're aware of any costs that could occur and what those costs could be before you actually sign up for them. I would say the biggest issue I see with a lot of individuals that come to us is they start there. They start there and they say, I've already got a transition place, Ryan. I'm set. And we'd have to let them know, you've talked to an attorney, that's great, but have you adjusted it since the most recent tax law change? Probably not. We want to adjust and make sure this is a flexible plan going forward, not just that document that sits on your bookshelf that's musty and dusty. So know that you don't have a transition plan in place with just your estate planning documents. You want to make sure you wrap everything around that. And to do that wrapper, what we suggest is not relying on just you. Involve a team, and that involves your attorney, your CPA, your credit lender of some kind, either a farm credit or some sort of savings bank type of lender. And we also want to involve those ancillary folks, the FSA individuals, the FSA officers, and your financial advisor. We want to make sure that if one decision makes sense, it doesn't throw off anything else that you're doing that's positive. Well, those are our 5 elements that we've covered. I hope you see the importance of addressing each one in the specific order that we've outlined here today to make sure that you've got a successful operation for generations to come. For me, if you can do those 5 things, you're going to be set and you're going to be part of that 30% that actually has a strong transition plan in place. Next step for you would be to reach out to your financial advisor, have this discussion, start these conversations today before it's too late and we start losing some of those options that we've talked through today. Again, my name is Ryan Patton. Thanks for being here with us.